Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Jeff Monin.
And I'm Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 141. And this episode, we wanted to talk about console and handheld modifications, whether you consider handheld systems a console themselves. That's not for today's episode. We're talking about the aftermarket modifications that people make to the consoles and devices that they love, whether to make a better experience, a more convenient experience, or to extend the life of a beloved period of gaming. There's a lot of reasons why people would go about doing it, but Matt and I can certainly speak for myself. I have never physically modified a system other than changing the batteries. Actually, I've done one or two, but we'll talk about that later on. More to the point, we've brought on Alex LaVelle, a fellow Certain POV podcaster and previous guest of the show, who has done a lot more console modifications to help continue this conversation. Alex, it's so good to have you back on the show.
I'm glad to be back. I have looked forward to it since you and Matt poked me about coming back. Yeah.
We're happy to have you. And I think also an important part of this conversation, besides just talking about the modding, is how I've noticed the video game industry has started to mirror the modding scene. Things like the Analog Pocket, I think, would have never existed without the modding scene and things like that. These consoles that are interim consoles or consoles that handle multiple gaming generations instead of just smaller gaming generations. But I guess to start, Alex, I mean, it's funny. We met through the podcast network, and I knew you were a nerd, but I just assumed you were a theater and comic book nerd only because that's what you were most vocal about. And then slowly through the Discord, I was like, oh no, this dude is definitely a gaming nerd. And then you would start sharing these photos of you modding controllers and other things. Have you always worked on and modded controllers and consoles since you've been playing games, or is that a recent thing?
By and large, it's a recent thing. I probably mentioned this back on the Metroid episode. But yeah, I've been gaming my whole life. My first console was an NES when I was 2 years old. My father sometimes made big swings with Christmas presents, and sometimes they made a lot of sense, and sometimes they made none. In the grand scheme of things, this one probably made the most sense. There are certainly occasions following that you would say I've modded something. Like, I remember as a child watching him take apart the NES to make it start working again because, the NES.
The NES. When I said I've never done a modification, I realized the only one I've done is I kickstarted the Blinking Light Win mod for the NES, which, for those who don't know it, it's one of the main structural weaknesses of the Nintendo Entertainment System in the West, and why it has its reputation is because of its VCR-like put in the front and push down. It would go along a long series of pins and would gradually, inevitably, bend those pins out of shape. It wasn't the dust. Sometimes it was the dust. It was usually the pins. And so the Blinking Light Win was a mod that you didn't need to push it down once it was already in. And I can certainly say that it has made my NES experience way better, but that's not the only reason it had to be fixed.
Yeah, as it turns out, maybe 40 years of blowing fake dust off things has corroded some context, too. Right. So, I remember watching him do that and thinking, oh, that looks very complicated on the inside, because I'm not sure I'd even hit double digits in age when I watched him do that.
And circuit boards are just magic.
They are. And, I'm not convinced, having done more modding, that they're any less magic than they were before. Just magic in a different way. The next thing I did, honestly, was actually an NES mod myself. Matt, my friend Adam.
Yes.
They had done some research and were like, hey, I think I know how to fix my NES, but I trust you to do it more than I trust myself to do it. So there's apparently a security chip on the American NES.
The 10NES chip, yes. A lot of third-party companies that would work past it had their own ways of working around it. Tengen infamously got the patent information under shady premises and built their own workaround, whereas Wisdom Tree, I think, is the one that made all the Bible Adventure ones. They would actually put a surge that would short out temporarily the 10NES chip just enough to get past it. So if you're a collector of those things, those will eventually break your system.
Well, and as it turns out, you can clip a leg on it. Apparently, this is what Adam found. I have not done the research on this myself, but we basically got in there and were like, we need to clip a leg on this chip. And then we're like, okay, how can we clip a leg on this chip? Because we can't get in there with scissors. I think we found up getting like a pair of those like tiny wire clipper nail trimmers and got under there with that. Yeah. So some really high-minded, well thought out modding in those early days. I wound up, in the grand scheme of things, again, pretty easy, but there were screws involved in this. Swapping out a hard drive and a PS3 at one point. Because I had not the launch model that could play PS2 games, but an early PS3 fat. And honestly, aesthetically, I never liked any other PS3 very much. So I will do whatever I can to keep that thing alive and working. And the next thing I need to do is replace its optical disc, which should be fun for me.
I got to do that for my like OG backwards compatible one. That thing died on me not too long ago.
So until about 2020, everything I did was out of necessity. Everything I did was to keep my hardware alive, because I have been fortunate to be able to be one of those weirdos who has been able to hang on to all of the consoles and handhelds and games that I acquired growing up.
Absolutely.
But in 2020, for reasons that probably need very little explanation, there was not...
I don't understand. Wait, what happened? You know,
something about crows and ravens, right? The Corvids came?
Yeah, it's a time skip.
Caw, motherfucker.
In like a video game.
Yeah. While they were changing the batteries in the birds.
Yeah.
There was only one conspiracy theory I ascribe to. It is because it is victimless. It is that Leah Michelle cannot read. That is my one indulgence. And I think she's earned that in her treatment of coworkers, especially coworkers of color. Anyway.
We should have more theater jokes on this show.
I can bring them. Yeah. Anyway. I work from home in my day job, and I work from theaters in my evening hours. And the latter ceased to exist. For 16 months of my life.
So you had some free time that was normally taken up.
I did, and other things happened, right? Like, the video game industry itself didn't feel that hit right away. We're kind of maybe coming out of feeling it now. But the comics industry did, because the distributor, Diamond, who at the time handled all comic book distribution.
Yeah, they had a stranglehold.
They've lost a lot of that market as a result of this. For about 2 months, didn't ship any books.
That's right. Yeah.
The entire industry froze for a little while. And there were some really cool schemes to like finally put digital sales forward and make that more user-friendly and friendlier towards shops. And all of that just kind of eroded pretty quickly once Diamond started shipping again, unfortunately.
Yep.
But for all those reasons, I found myself with a lot of downtime. And I live alone. I'm single. So like it's me in my house by myself. I had the thought, well, I need a new hobby. I have to have a new hobby to stay sane.
Yeah.
And then I looked at the dozens of comics a week I was reading and the 30 years of video game backlog and said, I need a hobby that I can't get behind on.
Right.
I need a hobby
something
that
you
not
can just do.
Right. Nothing that has a release schedule, something I can do on my own time. And at the same time, it was actually Griffin McElroy who started sharing videos of him doing some console modding. He'd gotten into it a little earlier anyway. And I'm like, oh, that actually looks very accessible to me. The video I saw first of his was a Game Boy Advance, I think. And anything with Game Boy in the name is going to be a great starting point. Like,
yep.
Yeah.
The thing I can probably talk to the best is how to get into this, right? Yeah. Anything Game Boy is going to be... Maybe hold off on the SP. Don't let that be your first thing.
Yeah.
But anything Game Boy is going to be a pretty good place to begin. Once I saw that video, I'm like, okay, let me do some research. Let me dig into this. And I found two things. One, anything Game Boy was easy. That's like, okay, cool. I can do that. I can start here. This feels accessible. Two is there were a lot of videos coming out at the time, and some of these have continued to come out, talking about this same thing, because guess what? I was not alone in finding this hobby at this time.
We couldn't all make sourdough.
Look, I have somewhere on my phone a list of like 50 sourdough starter names for anyone who needs one. Come at me on social media. You're going to have to get on Mastodon to do it, or the CPoV Discord. But if you need a starter name, I gotcha. Here's one for free. Leah Seydoux.
Nice. Excellent. Well done.
Thank you. On the subject of getting started in YouTube videos, like I'll go ahead and shout out probably at this point the best resource I could give if I could point a person toward one source.
Mm-hmm.
There's a channel called Macho Nacho. It's run by a guy named Tito.
I was going to shout them out. Thank you.
Yeah, he releases new videos just about every week. He goes through revisions of Game Boy screens, video output mods. Like anytime there's a new version just about, he'll update on it if there's something noticeable and different there. His videos are thoughtful and well laid out. Some of the more recent ones, if it's a type of mod he's done before, will jump over the process if it's not wildly different. But you can go back in that catalog to 2019, 2020, maybe 2021, if it's something that's been around a while, and like somewhere in there's a video on how to do it, like screw by screw, what you need to take apart and move.
And he's usually pretty good about citing which one you need to get to in order to get that process.
He is. He's very clear. He goes through the pros and cons of everything. He talks very straightforwardly about the costs of everything.
Mm-hmm.
He actually just put out, as we're recording, it was a couple months ago, a video on the equipment he uses and all of the tools that are the most useful to him. And that's, I think, a really great reference if this is something you want to get into.
Now, there's a lot of reasons why someone would want to get into modifying their console. Or in this case, let's say we're starting with just the Game Boy. And as somebody who's got a lot of Game Boys, something fun to just sort of point out in general as a talking point before I get back to what I was saying is it becomes very easy to have clickbaity things on YouTube or elsewhere of like, I modded and made the ultimate Game Boy Color. I made the ultimate Sega Genesis, the ultimate whatever it is, because you've done this mod and that mod and all the other things. But as you pointed out, Alex, there's revisions for these things that come out all of the time. You put in the ultimate IPS screen for your Game Boy, so it's got the perfect sharp pixels and all of these things. Then they're going to come out with a modification later or revision later that you didn't have to Dremel out that piece of plastic in your shell. You didn't have to do all of these things, or it just is more power efficient, things like that. Also, people need different things in their mods, and I'll get into that for myself later, but what do you think are some of the ways, because I definitely know people would go for modifications for aesthetics, which are just as simple as if you're doing, let's look at just the original Game Boy as an example here, different color shell, custom painted shell, different color buttons, functionality, a sharper screen, backlighting or front lighting, but usually backlighting at this point because of efficiency and whatnot, or making rechargeable batteries, improving the video output and the audio output so that you can use them for either chip tunes or connecting them to projectors and play them on home TVs. What else am I missing here, and where do you come from in terms of what is your, I guess, thesis on mods?
I think everything you listed is a valid reason, right? I think if I were to group reasons to mod things into kind of two general camps, two general ethoses. One would be, okay, I want to make the experience of playing this better, right? What better means here has a bunch of interpretations, but it's from the camp of improvement. The other sort of ethos to this, and you get into a lot of times the conversation becomes modding and restoration, right?
Yes.
And often they go hand in hand. Say you've got an OG Game Boy with a busted screen or a burnt out screen. You could drop in a new IPS, or you could do something that's more original in period. You could restore it to like new condition. And sometimes that's the ethos. Sometimes it's a preservationist ethos. And there are times that those things can overlap, right? So the work I tend to do tends to be more from the first camp, but with the second in mind. So you talked about custom shells needing to Dremel out a screw post or a piece of plastic.
Yep.
One of the things that was a decision I made early on, one, I have yet to mod any of my original, the ones I owned as a younger person, hardware.
Your historical pieces almost.
Yeah. And there will probably come points when I need to do some work on those. We can talk about that, what that might be in a minute. But for me, for starting out, I wanted to lower the stakes for myself as possible. Because I think at a certain level, what's important to me, regardless of the goal, is a little bit preservationist, because I don't want to needlessly ruin a piece of hardware.
Absolutely.
Especially one of those original circuit boards. Because in the world of modding and restoration, there's a lot you can do with aftermarket parts. but certain chips and certain circuit boards are functionally irreplaceable. There's some really cool stuff going on right now with the NES. I'll shout out one other YouTube channel right now, because again, I think they do more in the deep end technically. I would not recommend this as, hey, you're a beginner, go do their projects now. There are projects I watch them do, because I also just enjoy watching this type of stuff.
So cool.
That I would never imagine myself taking. And that's not to say I won't get there, but right now it's beyond my experience level. And that is Long Island Gaming Repair, I think is the YouTube channel. You'll get there if you just type in Long Island Gaming. But every Friday they do a Fix It Friday video. And they just did one that was about this project to build an open source NES circuit board. And they were looking at the top loader version of it, which is a little newer. But you can build this with as many aftermarket contemporary parts as possible. There are fewer than a dozen pieces they had to pull from a top loader, but they had one that was brought into the shop. Someone had tried to install a HDMI out or RGB out, something like that, and had damaged the board irreparably. But the parts they needed to do this mod were harvestable. So they were able to rebuild it. They had to do a little troubleshooting with the person designing this kit to get there. But they were able to make a working top loader out of what 3 or 4 years ago would have been considered a loss.
That's incredible.
That I think is super cool. That's why, like, even if I did mod something and like, oh no, I cut these traces, the circuit board is dead, it would probably go in a drawer somewhere. Because I think at this point, this community is growing so much that there will be more options like that.
Yeah.
So for me, the goal was, let's take some Game Boys that are not at their best. Some Game Boy. I started with Game Boy Advances because there's a lot of room in that shell to work with.
Oh my God. And it's also one of the systems that's one of the best consoles ever made that was produced the most poorly. Like, they would never die on you between the screen being terrible and like all the other things. Like, I feel like the Game Boy Advance is like the one to improve. I almost bought, and then I promise we'll get back on target. I almost bought, there's a game store in the city. I can't remember what the name of it was, but they sell not only just old games and like refurbished stuff, but like they rebuild the Game Boy Advances from the ground up. Like, they'll replace the shell, they replace the screen, so it's got a bright backlight and all this other stuff. The battery was replaced, and like they were selling them for $200-$300. And at first I was like, oh, that's ridiculous. And then I looked up what actually goes into rebuilding them. I'm like, oh no, this is a good price for this like Frankenstein Game Boy Advance that's actually better than the original.
Parts and labor. Was that at Video Games New York?
That was it. Yeah.
Video Games New York. A fantastic place to go to. Great shop. And yeah, even just window shopping the modded and repaired systems that they have is a treat and a delight, provided you can navigate the little halls, because they use all of their
so
square
compact.
footage.
Yeah.
And also, while I'm giving names and things, the YouTube channel is Long Island Retro Gaming.
Thank you.
If you've ever gone to their convention out on Long Island, which I unfortunately have missed, the videos look great.
Yeah. It's just part of my Friday routine that I take a long lunch and watch whatever they've posted that day.
Awesome.
Ditto Thursdays and Macho Nacho.
Also, Macho Nacho's aesthetic during those videos is top-notch.
It's so good. So good. Just so many glowing LED lights. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah.
I will say, on the subject of cost, I think that's a good point to talk about, and then I'll go back on topic. There is like cost to doing this, and that's part of why I say, like, take your time and pick things that feel accessible. I kind of went all out. I went new shell, new screen, rechargeable battery, USB-C port. Like, I kind of went there, but also I was in one of those positions where, like, all of my expenses except rent and food had stopped in 2020.
Right.
Or mortgage and food had stopped. So I had a little wiggle room to build up tool set and parts. But yeah, like, in any one of these, if I'm buying the original hardware and new parts, I'm probably running anywhere between $150 to $200 if I don't do something super fancy.
And have you noticed the price of donor systems or pieces going up
so
as
much.
more people have been getting into this?
So much. And I think it's a couple of things. I think it's more people are getting into it. I also think it's now that there are kits for lots of these kinds of repairs on the market, people who have these skill sets are realizing, hey, there's actually a market for these modified consoles. There are people who have the affection and affinity for a Game Boy Advance, but aren't someone who wants to learn to solder.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they're seeing a place for people to come in and buy these systems. And they're very much worth that cost, especially if you want something that feels original in the hand.
Yeah.
To maybe give a little more succinct answer to your question, Geoff, I think largely I'm coming at it from, like I said, wanting to make it better, but I want to keep those original parts in place. I don't want to do anything that's going to like drastically risk or damage what I'm working with. That's not to say anyone who takes those risks is wrong. They may just have more skill with electrical engineering than I do as a person with a theater degree.
I mean, same. I have definitely made some slipshod but workable modifications to all sorts of things with my own technical theater background. Yours is more extensive than mine, so please just shudder at the imagination. You're not wrong. But I also know that I'm handy with power tools, but I have not put in the time to get good at soldering. And
you are actually tapping into the other reason I got into this, the other backwards reason I got into this. I started in theater and lighting design.
All right.
And I've moved to other things, directing, stage managing, because of all the podcasting editing work I've done now. I'm doing more sound design than I ever expected.
And that's where I started. And then it was like, put up some flats, kid. Here's a screw gun.
Yep, that's 100% how it works. If you are a warm body and nearby, you will be given a screw gun at some point. But something I had always meant to learn to do was solder. I had never held or owned a soldering gun before 2020.
Yeah, I had a little bit of, when I was in college, I got to do a workshop on making audio cables, so I soldered up some XLR cable, and maybe once or twice after that, but it was always, I was not the most qualified one there, so I was never in line for it.
Well, and that's just it. I'm at this point never the most qualified one in the room, because usually there's a technical director in the room too, and a master electrician, and another lighting designer. But it's still something that had always been for 20 years in the back of my head as I want to learn to do this.
Yeah, it feels like one of those things of it's a simple enough skill that you can improve, do more complex things. And once you get the basics, the doors just open.
So I got a simple soldering kit that came with like a very small practice board. And I practiced soldering some wires to pads and to the holes in the circuit boards, which are called vias. I watched a bunch of videos on the technique of soldering. And then I said, okay, cool. Let's open up this Game Boy. I did get a separate shell, so I wouldn't have to, a replacement shell, so I wouldn't have to cut into that original shell. I did get an IPS screen, like I said, the rechargeable battery, and the way this one was built, one of the nice things about the Game Boy Advance as a starting point is there's no like separate power board to solder on for charging. You just buy a shell that comes with a hole in the battery cover, and that board is just part of the battery. It's usually sticky taped onto it, and the plug just sticks through the battery cover, and it just has contacts that touch the contacts where the batteries would normally go. So if you get a shell that is already meant for one of those batteries, you don't have to do any modification. The little fin that usually sits between the batteries and an OEM shell is not there. They take that out of the design for aftermarket shells for this exact reason. So all you have to do is pop out one pair of the springs, one side of the contacts, and you just drop this in and it's done. The battery replacements are solder-free kits.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Well, and I mean, considering the popularity and ubiquity of certainly Game Boy Advance and a lot of the Nintendo handhelds, it makes sense. You can do that, and chances are somebody's got at least one of those lying around, you know. You can just shape it to that, and you're not dealing with, like, the PC building community where it's everyone needs to make it super adaptable. You know what the shape is.
Exactly. And part of the way that it's been fun to watch this community grow is not only are you seeing new kits come out and new parts come out and new mods get developed because there's more demand in general, you're seeing a level of refinement come to older mods that have been out. Like, I'm going to stick with the Game Boy example for a moment because, again, I think it's the most accessible. And we can talk about some of the more out there stuff before all is said and done.
It's practically emblematic of
I think so.
Certainly to me.
And, you know, any OG Game Boy Pocket, Game Boy Advance, any of those is an easy starting point. And to varying degrees, anything I say here is true about all of those. I'm talking about the Advance, the OG
The horizontal one.
Horizontal, thank you. Landscape is what I was looking for.
Yeah, because it's a great form factor.
It is.
For kids' hands and adult hands, and people with very long fingers, like me.
One of the things that I heard echoed over and over again in some of these early, like late 2019, just ahead of the curve in 2020 videos was people who were getting into modding being excited about having that form factor and a screen that their eyes could see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And watching some of those mods, like that screen, that IPS screen mod, the model that I usually grab because it's super cheap comparatively, and I'm comfortable doing the little bit of soldering. The model that I've grabbed in the past when I've done those is one where you have to solder usually 3 or 4 wires.
Mm-hmm.
But that exact same kit now ships with little electrostatic pads that sit just under the shell. So instead of having to solder a wire to start an X and Y or select an X and Y or whatever button combination you want to change the brightness on the screen, you've got this little pad and you can just tap it and it will change that screen and you don't have to do any soldering. Now, if you want to solder to buttons, you can unsolder that pad and solder to a button.
It's all still there.
It's all still there. You have to desolder this little like flag-shaped thing it'll pop right off the moment you heat it up. But it's made so that, okay, more people can get into this. It's harder to do, right? As the scene gets bigger, yes, there are more complex options out there, but the basic options actually become more user-friendly.
Well, and I think also especially in video games, as things get more popular, they get more accessible, which is what we want. And like, if folks have noticed why I've been so quiet, it's because this is not a skill I have, literally any level. I just am afraid to tinker with that stuff. To me, like we were talking about how circuit boards seem like magic, the whole thing, the fact that it turns on when I press the on button is like a magic trick to me. I've had custom PCs for a long time. And so like I changed a hard drive on my current PC and I've swapped out a CD drive when I still had CD drives. And like, to me, that was a huge deal. To anyone else who builds anything, we're like, you effectively plugged something in. Congratulations, Matt. Like, it's not the end all be all of
Let us have
anything.
this, okay?
Right. But like, I think that what's really fascinating about what Alex is talking about is that like, I found like the video game scene just in general has become more accessible because more people are getting into it, younger people are getting into it, older people are getting into it. And it sounds like the modding community is just following that same trajectory that the broad gaming industry has followed of like, oh, more people are interested. Shit, let's make it so they can get it, kind of a thing.
Well, and I think sort of going back to that preservationist heart of it, I think that's a big piece of making it more accessible because certainly this was not the way I thought about it when I started. Truly, it was, I'm bored and I want to learn to solder.
Right.
And yes, the idea of pulling out my Game Boy Advance and having a nicer screen on it is appealing to me. I enjoyed those games and for the first time in my life have time to go revisit some of them. Also bored. But very much now, having kind of steeped myself in this, like the idea of anyone throwing away a Game Boy, like going through an attic and saying, well, this must not work. It's like, give it to me. I can make it, or I will give you money for that. Let me make it work.
I've started getting donor consoles from friends and folks that are like, they have that shoebox or larger than a shoebox of, well, I'm not playing these games anymore. I don't need these games anymore. My home is one of those farms upstate where people send their old video games, and that usually contains a Game Boy Pocket or two, so it's inevitable. Now, as far as console modifications, I would say that there are 2 major mods that happen. One is SD card compatibility or modification, which also happens on handheld systems so that you can digitally upload either games that you physically have or just some games. It doesn't matter why.
Well, aftermarket games that were made by indie developers for consoles after their time.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean,
totally.
I have an analog pocket, and I am loving the fact that that is a platform for a lot of folks who make retro throwback games to make sort of pseudo Game Boy games, and they'll make the Game Boy ROM file, and they'll also make the Pocket file, and I can then load those onto my Pocket, and I have that Game Boy experience without having to invest in a cartridge flasher to put the games onto a physical cartridge in some way, which is fine for some folks, but I am in that camp of that's a bridge too far from my little house, my little home here. But the other is HD modifications or
Yeah.
RGB modifications, video mods for all sorts of consoles, because so many consoles, so many home consoles were made before the days of HDMI, and some, in fact, already have digital video built into them. Rather infamously, if you've looked into this at all, listeners, is the GameCube. The GameCube already has digital video, so there's aftermarket hardware that is a pretty penny, but you don't have to open up your console at all. You plug it in and it's HD capable. Whereas others, you have got to go deep in there. I have accidentally fallen backwards into Atari collecting, and there is not a single of the 2600, the 5200, or the 7800, they only have RF output. So I got myself a Retron 77 to play my 2600 carts, but I would love to have a 7800 in my home so that I could play the failure to challenge the NES console that's also backwards compatible with the 2600, except only RF out. So my options are either get something like a VCR that does RF pass-through, or modify it in some small or large way that, again, cutting the case so that you can fit the HDMI out, soldering, desoldering, and moving things around so that you can continue to not only preserve but play those games. That is the major avenue that I see in the console mods.
The other thing, and this is going to be true regardless, handheld, console, whatever, there are parts on circuit boards, especially in older consoles, that have shelf lives. Capacitors, depending on the kind used, may only be good for 30, 40 years. Look at the Game Gear. Look at the Sega Nomad. These are two in particular where if you start watching videos about modding those, almost always the first thing out of someone's mouth will be, well, we have it open anyway, so we're going to replace all the caps because that hasn't been done before.
Yep. I have 4 Game Gear systems in my home. One of them turns on. And I blame the capacitors.
Yeah. And some of these capacitors, they can pop and leak liquid out and ruin circuit boards.
Yeah, it's not just they failed you. They will take the whole damn thing with it.
Yeah. So maybe you say, hey, I've got this and I want to keep it working, right? Maybe it's purely that. I am not a software modder. But if you are, say, someone who has an extensive library and you're just like, okay, I want to not have to go swap a disk out, I'm fine ripping a ROM off and throwing it on an SD card, right? You've got the SD card readers in there. You also have, though, like some cool suites of mods, and these vary so much from hardware to hardware, but they can add some functionality that wasn't there. Maybe you want to drop in not just a card reader, but something that can also tie to your wireless storage and just pull an updated file off of a Dropbox or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
It can get its firmware updates that way. It can all those things. I know the PS1 has the PSIO that connects into that external port that they got rid of in the 9000 model because most people were using it for Game Sharks.
Yeah, there's something similar for GameCube that uses one of those mostly unused ports.
The expansion ports that were like, they never got around to it.
As long as you're not out there somehow still playing Phantasy Star Online using that broadband connector, you probably don't need that port.
How did you know?
But there are also just, flashy things you can do. You can drop in Bluetooth compatibility for controllers if you want to go there.
Yeah.
And these are not necessarily any that I have rushed into, but they look cool. But that add LED lights and things. They just tap into a circuit board and pull a little power off.
Yeah.
And who doesn't want to feel like a 90s hacker just a little bit when they play video games?
Exactly. There are mods you can do along all kinds of lines like that. You can get into some really extreme stuff. And again, this is past a point I'm comfortable doing anything. But there are mods out there to take the circuit board from a Wii U and drop it into a handheld with the form factor of basically a giant-sized Game Boy and play Wii U and GameCube games and Wii games, or maybe it was a Wii board and it played Wii and GameCube. But like to just trim circuit boards and drop them into specialty cases and turn your old consoles into handhelds.
The human need to put things into other weirder things is deep, and I don't know what it's connected to, but I do not want to stop it.
Yeah, it's its own kind of art, right? Like it is taking back to the whole circuit boards are kind of magic thing. It is taking this thing that works by very specific rules and that each piece on it does very specific things and saying, well, okay, if I want to sacrifice A, B, and C for the sake of making it portable, I'm going to take the disk drive out. Now I don't need this side of the circuit board, this chunk of the circuit board. I can cut that away, bypass some parts of it, and read from a card reader. And hey, now it fits in this little shell. Like, the cleverness of that is astounding to me. I doubt I ever have the proficiency to design something like that on my own.
Yeah, because a lot of those are custom designs. And this also gets to there is an interesting equation that comes into console modding, handheld modding, as far as I'm concerned. It becomes a thing of, a bit of goal, like whether it's preservation, aesthetic, cool factor, whatever, as well as what are your needs. I am not a business world human. I'm not,
No,
but I'm very familiar with the term, minimum viable product, MVP, all that kind of a thing. What is sort of, to mangle that horribly, and all the business majors can just get at me here, what is the core thing that you want out of when the console is done being modded? Because I'm also, you did bring up the Game Gear, and I would love to take a moment on Game Gear here, where, yes, I have 4 handheld Game Gear systems. They have found their way into my life. I paid money for one of them. And because I have a nostalgic love for the Game Gear. It's the handheld system I grew up with. But yeah, the capacitors and all sorts of other problems with it, it's ripe for being fixed up. It doesn't have the same ubiquity that the Game Boy does, and it's a little weirder. But a number of years ago was already a screen mod, the McWill replacement, I believe it's called, that makes it an HD screen. You could get it modded so that it's VGA out, so you can plug it into your TV. That kind of dates it, but there you are. And it replaces the little tiny thin fluorescent tube that was the front light, makes it a properly backlit, all of these things, and it's fantastic. It also was around $250.
Yeah.
And so, fortunately, buying yourself a Game Gear that you find out in the wild is not expensive. But there is that cost to take into account. One of the reasons, in fact, the major reason I have an analog pocket was from the get-go was there's an adapter and you could play Game Gear games on it. I was like, well, shit, sign me up. It's mine now. And that's what I did. And I can play, and I am playing Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance games on it. And they're beautiful and they're wonderful. I can play Game Gear again. And that is what that cost is worth to me.
Yeah.
And in talking to people about like Analog Pocket, friends that have nostalgia for those old games, but don't have the extensive library that I or Alex may have. And it's kind of is it worth it for me to spend the amount of money on an Analog Pocket and then start collecting games? I don't know. Let's figure that out. That's a different thing. The SD card replacements for something like a PS1, that's another console that I look at a lot for modifications. That's why I know the PSIO. I would definitely, whenever I feel confident doing console mods, I'm giving that thing an HDMI upgrade.
Well, and it's worth saying, too, in that same breath, like, physical disc media also has a shelf life. We think of these things...
It has a shelf life.
People of our age think of these things as permanent because we remember VHS and cassette tapes. But these have shelf lives.
Disc rot's real.
The petroleum in discs, those polymers built from petroleum, degrade over time.
The disc reader will fail. The disc itself will fail. And so finding the middle ground of something that would allow you to digitize and preserve your physical collection and either play it until it breaks and then go digital or whatever that is, a lot of the SD card replacements, modifications for the PS1 completely remove the disk drive. So for me, personally, I would love to have it both ways, but that's me. But I think there are ways to do it. That's why the PSIO appeals to me. But it's those things too, like what are you giving up? If you just want to be playing PS1 games and you don't have over 100 PS1 games on your shelf, Jeff, you might not care as much about ditching the disk drive because you still have the physical thing and you can work with that. And so there are these sorts of push and pull because, yeah, shy of just, well, screw this system, I'm just throwing it out or I'm smashing it with a hammer because I want to feel something to watch it break. These things are going to fail. I know that there might be arguments or things of like, oh, but you're taking a perfectly good system out of the pool, out of the market. Time's going to do that.
Yeah, well, and depending on what you're doing, right, that may or may not be true. Going back to that sort of overlap between make it better and preserve it, there is a strong contingent, and not every mod is this going to be true of, but there's a strong contingent that looks at what are the mods that make it better, how can we make it reversible?
That's fair.
Right?
And also these updates and these things where it's like, Alex, you said very early on, like kind of preserving the original experience in terms of like playing on the original hardware. But something that Matt and I talk about a lot in sort of retro throwback games that come out or updates to older games, here's our Shovel Knight for the day, that play like you remember them feeling, not how they actually were. And there is sort of a shift in paradigm of design that happens in games and gaming. So even those older experiences, there's quality of life updates, there's convenience points that maybe you might argue get good or lazy, but I'm like, maybe it just preserves my time and we don't need to have those just to have them. And so there are those things where you can play OG Game Boy on your DMG big ass shell Game Boy, and it will have almost invisible modern conveniences because you're used to them being there now. And that's a great way to get folks who may not have the same nostalgia for the Game Boy to play those games and see the merits of why we still play them.
Exactly. And part of the reason I've kind of hovered around the screen examples in this is I think screen is, for anything that didn't have a lit screen, the best example of this, right?
Absolutely. Whether that or battery life, I feel like those are the two biggies.
Those are the two biggies, definitely. I don't remember being particularly frustrated by batteries on a lot of this hardware as a kid. I mean, honestly, like, older Game Boys got pretty good life out of batteries, and at the time, the norm was batteries were consumable. You just lived with that. That's different now.
I grew up with a Game Gear, so I know this.
Right, and that's different now. So the battery mod kit I bought, there was actually a small flaw on the production run that mine came out of. And I tried to repair it myself and pulled up a trace, and I'm like, okay, I should replace this eventually, but it's also $50 and I have Inaloops. So like, all cards on the table. For right now, I just throw Inaloops in it when I want to play it. But yeah, I definitely am glad I don't have to put batteries in and out. The thing I remember is being like on a car trip or it being late at night and being like, okay, I've got to awkwardly lean halfway
So
out the window almost, it feels like, to get street light. Yeah.
Yeah, this is why I had a Game Gear, because there was a lot of late night drives to and from Vermont for my family, Jersey to Vermont. And so I never had to do that lean to play Sonic.
The other kind of in this category of modern convenience, though, this is one that's still on my to-do list. I haven't done it yet because it's a pretty irreversible mod, and I'm a little afraid of one piece of it. But there is a chip for the Game Boy Advance, and it works in an SP as well, called the GB Accelerator.
Go on.
And one of the things I found once I did my first Game Boy Advance mod is like, this is great to play on. Let me throw in Golden Sun, a game I adore. Oh, I can't adjust the text speed or the walking speed. This is a very slow game to play, no matter how much I enjoy the mechanics and story of it. I'm like, why didn't I put the GB Accelerator in this? This is a chip that lets you adjust the playback time of games. In order to do it, you have to remove the timing crystal from the motherboard.
Which already sounds like an RPG quest.
Right, right. It's very on brand. And this was originally developed for people actually who use retro hardware to make music.
Right, because you can change the tempo and stuff.
Exactly.
And it allowed for pitch bending as well.
And that was where this came from, but also you can play your old slow-to-play RPGs at twice the clock speed.
Yeah.
Which is, if you look at any modern release of old Final Fantasy games, a standard feature.
Yeah, all of the remasters on the Switch, and why I love them and why I'm considering buying 8, a game that I very famously do not like, is because you can fast forward, you can turn off random battles, you can, turn on one-hit kills. Like, they essentially modded their own games so you can make them easy. They gave them easy modes. They gave them accessibility options without really changing the game. You just press select and then like a menu comes up. And I think that's brilliant.
And even more than easy mode, it's they gave me the options to decide which things I don't have time or patience for, but I want to experience the rest of it.
And like, I will happily grind in a Pokemon game, right? For example.
Oh God, yeah.
I mean, this was how I didn't get behind on podcast listening in those same 16 months I started modding, is I would turn on Pokemon Sword and just go do Dynamax raids for an hour and listen to an episode of a podcast. And I could half pay attention to Pokemon because that is so reflexive to me at this point.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Listen to whatever I wanted and unwind in a very specific way that's like not at my desk and not engaged. And I'm in the same four walls, but I'm kind of just like, I don't want to necessarily say dissociating from being in the same four walls, but it's not that, right?
Put yourself in a different headspace.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Maybe there's some transcendental language to make that sound more intentional and less unhealthy, but I was never a big Thoreau person, frankly. So going back to an older Pokemon game, I am happy to sit there and do the ridiculous amount of battle after battle after battle that modern games have kind of made unnecessary in ways that I appreciate. But I don't know what your TikTok FYPs look like. Mine has decided, oh, you like Pokemon. You must want to hear 35 to 40-year-old men complain about modern Pokemon games. I'm like, no,
please don't.
I don't. I don't, in fact. I don't
Please,
want to
God,
know
no.
anyone's thoughts on specific shiny Pokemon designs. I certainly don't want to know what you think would be better, because I don't care.
Yeah.
Anybody whose opinions I want on that are people I text,
Yes.
not on TikTok.
But there's this contention that's like, well, the animations of the new game are too fast. And then they'll show like 45-second long animations for one attack. I'm like, I have a life. I have things I have to do. Right. If I get 30 minutes a day to play it, I don't want to spend that entire 30 minutes watching 90 battle animations.
Right. Sometimes I want to turn that on. Sometimes I want to turn that off. Like, yeah, let's engage with the epicness. Yeah. I know the original Red and Blue, even if you turned off battle animations, when you fought the champion, it turned battle animations on because epicness. I don't need that on the Switch all the time.
Well, you know, battle animations are helpful to know, like, what's just happened if you're not totally paying attention, right? You can look also down and see the waves rising up and know, oh, hey, that was Hydro Pump, whatever.
Yeah.
I just want that to happen at twice the speed it normally happens. So, like, I want to do this mod. I want to reclaim that time in that way so I can do more gaming and the little bit of time I have sometimes.
Absolutely. And it's funny to think about the things of conveniences and modernity that, like, move through because I go back and forth on battery modifications for handhelds, if only because of, again, a lot of things of lifestyle, of time. Yeah, I definitely want things to accelerate. I have a life. I'm an adult. But I also live in New York City, and I ride the subway a lot. And that is why one of the reasons I love handheld games, but I am a very forgetful person. So if I have to recharge the batteries of things, if it's not the switch that goes into its dock, the amount of times I will take out my Vita and realize, crap, I forgot to charge it. Well, I'm screwed. I kind of am back and forth. I'm like, I like just taking the Game Boy Color and an extra pair of AA's, and that does me all right. Because you're absolutely right, Alex. The old Game Boys have great battery life. And so when they die on me, that's all I needed.
And, like, that's it, right? Like, I went to, okay, here's a USB-C battery, because I don't have a commute. I live in the South, where, to my perpetual chagrin, public transit is seen as this thing we have to keep in check because racism.
Yup.
And I would kill to be able to spend like half an hour to an hour on a train or a bus to get to where I'm going and use that time productively. I enjoy
for gaming.
I enjoy driving. I don't mind traffic. Like, there is a relaxation that comes to me of sitting in rush hour traffic and knowing that I can't work on things. I just have to be in that moment and listen to music or a podcast and enjoy it or go crazy.
Yeah. On the flip side, I can't sing as loud or at all on a subway as I could if I were driving a car.
Yeah, but I play games at home. I can plug in a charger. I can get myself a 6-foot-long USB-C, plug it into the wall. I'm set. I'm good to go. To me, are the inner loops ideal? No, because I'll pick that up and they'll be dead, and I'll go to the others, and I won't have plugged the charger back into the outlet I plug it into when I need to charge them, and I'll be like, okay, I guess I'm playing something else. It is
modern problems.
Much like turning on any console, be like, oh, hey, I need to do 17 updates before I can play anything. Guess I'm not playing that.
Yep.
Batteries are the console updates of the 90s.
You're not wrong.
The other thing, too, is like, that's what I'm like, you know, there are mods out there that throw induction charging, like key wireless charging into old handhelds. It's like, you could functionally have yourself that Game Boy cradle where you just lay it down on your charging pad and just let it charge overnight.
I mean, living the way that I do, most of my handheld and portable device charging is in my kitchen. And if I were to be able to turn a kitchen drawer into the charging drawer, and I know people like can run a surge protector into the back of the drawer and just have that be, but if I could just make it a surface that was induction charging, just open it up, throw the console in there, and it's being charged. Oh my God.
We have the technology.
The future is here, everyone. Put it in the drawer. It's fine.
Return the enjoyment device to the energy vestibule.
Enter the enjoyment cubicle space something. And this becomes that thing of it's very clickbaity, we've made the ultimate this, but what is it for you? So all right, what is the one modification you wish you could make to all of your things or to a specific handheld console? Or what is your ultimate? Like, what are the things you need? What's the checklist?
I think for me, it's tough because I'm not a modder. I also don't have the collection for it. Like you were talking earlier about like modding this thing so you could play all these other things. For me, I have an EverDrive. And the EverDrive is great because I can put that one cartridge with a bunch of ROMs for Game Boy Advance games that I totally acquired legally into my SP and play them all at once because I don't own any of those games. And when I looked up how much it cost to buy Metroid Fusion alone, one of my favorite games, and saw the price tag,
it's astronomical.
I was like, I'm buying an EverDrive. I'd rather spend the $150, $200 on that than that one amount of money for one game. I don't know. For me, I think the ultimate mod would be to make older consoles handheld. Like the GameCube was practically handheld. It had a handle on it. It's one of the best consoles of all time. If I could like make it SD card readable and make the flap for the disk drive into a screen instead, and literally just put two GameCube controllers on the side of the GameCube, it'd be chunky as hell, but it'd be cool to like be portable. And I'm sure they've made portable GameCubes.
Oh, yeah.
There are tons of channels that make portable versions of all the consoles. And to me, that's where my brain goes, is like, I like lying on my couch, playing my Switch or playing my Steam Deck. So if I can make all of my consoles portable, it would be a challenge with the PS5 considering the size and weight. But like, that's the ideal mod for me, I think, is anything that makes consoles portable because I love portable gaming.
I know the PS1, the PSONE, had the first-party screen thing that you could put on it. I just looked it up. Apparently there was a company called Intech, or is a company called Intech, that made that sort of thing for that generation of consoles. There's one for the Xbox, but there's one for the GameCube as well.
Ooh.
So that's already out there. And this question isn't necessarily what's within your wheelhouse or what you can do. It's what do you want?
Sure.
So we're already partway there.
So I'll say this, the closer I get to having my ideal of a handheld already, like the Game Boy Advance I have, other than wanting to drop that one chip in there, anything else I did to that would be for aesthetics or just to soup it up, right? Like there is a line of machined aluminum shells. I've bought a set of them for a pair of Joy-Cons. They're very nice. They feel great in the hand, this product line. Boxy Pixel is the manufacturer. I'd love to throw a Game Boy Advance in one of those shells. That'd be cool. But in terms of what would make the experience better, actually, the thing I've been thinking about the most is I do want to get into some of the software stuff so I can grab an EverDrive and just have that library with me at all times. I'm very close to what the ultimate version of that is for me, which it turns out is rechargeable batteries and a nicer screen. And if I could just hit a couple buttons to make it go fast, I'd be there. Then I just want to have all the games with me all the time. For consoles, especially for non-modern consoles, especially that like GameCube generation, I just want to make everything Bluetooth. I want to be able to mod a controller to be Bluetooth and then put a Bluetooth receiver in it and not have wires. The biggest thing that gets in the way of my playing more GameCube stuff or PS2 stuff is the fact that those wires just are not long enough for modern living rooms.
Nope.
They were designed for you to set closer, and it's like, that was great when your biggest TV was a 22-inch 4x3 CRT, but if I've
sit on
got
the floor of the basement,
a 70-inch flat screen mounted to my wall, I'm not going to sit on the floor with my head up like a turkey drowning in a rainstorm just because of the controller.
Yeah, the Wavebird was so ahead of its time. And I know people who mod Wavebirds to make them better, longer range, better battery life, all that. But like, the Wavebird, I think, is still like the pinnacle of video game controllers in a lot of ways, and what set forward for all the wireless controllers we have now, you know?
So
Agreed.
I actually found, and it's not in production, but the person who designed it made the files available freely, a GameCube controller mod to take a non-Wavebird controller and make it Bluetooth.
Nice.
That's amazing.
The only thing that stands in my way is the fact that I would need to have the time to get familiar enough with it to go on like PCBWay and have the PCB for it custom printed, because when this guy made it, he printed what I'm guessing was the minimum run at the time from PCBWay and sold off the 19 he didn't need and kept the one he did, and has never in the last 5 years since reproduced this. PCBWay will do one-offs now, so I could just take those files and order it and order all the components. I need to sit down and understand it before I do that.
That's fair. You've now reminded me that there has only been really one hardware piece that's been produced, one hardware line that allowed you to play Bluetooth-capable PlayStation controllers, PS3, PS4, on PS1, PS2 consoles. If somebody could bring that back, and I could use my PS4 or, heck, a PS5 controller on my PS1 or my PS2, that'd be incredible.
I bought a wireless PS2 controller, a kickstarted one, a while back. I still have not.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
I still haven't even plugged it in and tried it because time, since it actually got to me. So I still need to try that out because I know there are things on the market that would give me that. But also, I've got a bunch of old GameCube controllers in various states of disrepair. I'd love to, when I clean some of them up, just make them wireless. Let me use that with Bluetooth on a Switch.
Yeah.
That would be amazing, yeah.
Because now that I've got the OLED, I've got one of the GameCube ports, but they cut one of the USBs from the OLED dock.
Yep.
The other thing I keep plugged in is the Joy-Con charger. So it's like I've got to swap between the Joy-Con charger and the dock now if I want to use the dock. It's like, okay, so let me just make it wireless.
Yep. I think that's doable.
Yeah.
Now, if somebody wanted to get started on modifying whatever console, whether it's getting into DMG Game Boys, whether it's the GameCube, the PS1, modifying a 3DO, I don't care. What do you think are the key tools to get at first? Is it getting the specific screwdrivers for those consoles? Should people get the soldering gun as soon as possible and not worry about doing the soldering project so they get some practice in? What would you recommend as the in there?
So the soldering gun question, I think, comes down to comfort. If you're going to be afraid of it while you do it, wait until you're not afraid. That's going to limit the mods you can do. But until you're ready to use it, I'd hold back, because you can do some damage with that, right?
Oh, yeah.
You can make a system inoperable if you set it in the wrong place.
Yes. I mean, I definitely remember even in the early internet days reading horror stories of people trying to mod chip their systems and donking it up hard.
But, like we've said, a lot of what I'd consider entry-level mods have found ways to be solder-free.
Mm-hmm.
So here's what I'd say you almost definitely need. Get you some good fine point tweezers. I actually just I promised my brother over the holidays while I was up at our parents' house for Christmas that I'd swap out the joysticks in his Joy-Cons because they were drifting. I can't believe we've made it to this point in the conversation and just now mentioned Joy-Con drift. The mod I have done the most is replacing people's joysticks.
Yeah, well, because a lot of times people think of modding and they think of the big shifts and the big changes and the cut this and do that. But really, probably the most practical are the invisible ones, the small ones, the realignments like that.
And the funny thing about that, and I tell this to anyone who I offer to do it for, you've both heard me say this in Discord, it's like, if you're going to do this is also the time to put them in a new shell if you want, because it's the difference between 2 screws.
Mm-hmm.
I take out 2 more screws to swap shells than I do to swap out joysticks. So I recently just bought a kit of 6 or 7 fine-tipped of different sizes and angles tweezers for $7. They're super cheap. They're easy to get. I recommend having, depending on what you're doing, something that can hold a circuit board for you. There are a few different versions of that out there. The one I have just has a couple of little metal clamps that you can adjust the tension on and a little magnifying glass.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely recommend getting some kind of, they're like silicone rubber mats. The one I have has like 120 half centimeter by half centimeter divots in it, so you can just set individual screws in them as you go.
Oh, cool.
In my experience, and in most of the advice I've seen about this, keep original screws with original shells, use replacement screws with replacement shells. So I'll take all the screws that might have come with a replacement shell, drop them in those wells and organize them, the big magnetic wells, lay out the original screws in the little divots, and then when I'm buttoning up the systems, I'll just make sure I'm matching what I'm putting in with what came out so that I've got the right lengths. The reason you want to keep original with original is the thread pitch is going to match, so you're not going to strip out those screw holes over time. That's mostly what it boils down to. Screwdriver set, yeah, get a good, comfortable screwdriver, get tips that can swap in and out, and you're good. I got one set that did all of that. A lot of these beginner level mods, though, especially if they're shell mods, will send you the screwdrivers you need to do the thing.
Incredible.
Every time I have done a Joy-Con shell swap, I have gotten the same set of bits and screwdrivers. I have like 6 or 7 of them now.
It's the IKEA Allen wrench of modding.
It is. Like, I still think it's worth investing in a set because you're always going to run into something weird, or you'll want to do a mod that doesn't come with those, right? But at this point, it's like, I'm never going to buy a set of screwdrivers specifically to work on Joy-Cons ever again, because I can open any drawer in my house and find one now. There's also what's called a game bit screwdriver, which if you're doing older consoles, and I think the Game Gear requires it.
Tri-wing?
Not even Tri-wing. The game bit screwdriver looks like a socket that you would use to extend a screwdriver. This was actually a kind of security screw used mostly in the 80s and 90s. Nintendo used them and Sega used them. But you'll see if you flip over an older console, these deeply recessed screws that what you actually have to do is you're avoiding a post that keeps you from getting to them with a standard screwdriver.
Incredible.
So they're just these long shafts that dig down and catch the screw and pull it out. So yeah, you may need some specialized bits to get into older consoles. When you're getting into soldering, like let's say you do want to do something with soldering, start with a cheap soldering gun, get something that's well-reviewed but cheap. Don't invest in the high-end hardware right out of the gate, because if you find that it's not something you enjoy doing or comfortable with, that stuff can get expensive. The first kit I bought was like a $35 kit. But that first year that I used it, it was all I needed.
I'd say that's good to start with. So
yeah.
That means everyone now has the information they need to get out there and start making some cool mods.
I'll tell you the one other thing I did, and this is not tool or equipment, and this is so against my usual nature as a person. I am not one to journal. I am not one to write things down because I lose stuff like that. But I had like an old moleskin I'd gotten on like 90% off sale at a Barnes & Noble that was closing.
Best way to get a moleskin,
and
honestly.
I thought, hey, let me grab that. And I keep this just with all my modding stuff. Like, here are the mods I have done. Here is how to do those mods, so that I've got instructions written in my own logic and my own language, which to me are more accessible than the technical drawings you get sometimes. And that let me go through and watch 2 or 3 videos by different creators and sort of take their advice and the things that I know I need to remind myself of and put them on paper for me. So somewhere just to like write yourself the instructions that you know will set you up for success.
Very cool.
Excellent. Well, Alex, thank you for joining us. This is one of those conversations, and we have these from time to time on the pod, where like I know so little and I get to learn as much as the listener learns, which is always fun for me. Not a practice I think I'll ever engage in still, but is fascinating.
I'm always 5 minutes away from doing it, so it's a matter of time.
Well, you both have my number, so...
Yes, that is true. I mean, I think still one of these days I'm going to get you to do one of those bright purple see-through shells for my Joy-Cons at some point. But before we wrap up the show totally, I would love for you to take a moment to plug the kinds of stuff that you're working on and where folks can find you online if they want to ask you questions about modding, as well as, you know, the non-video game stuff that you do.
Yeah, so if you want to get at me, technically I do still have Twitter notifications turned on, but I am never on Twitter anymore because I'm not sure there's a human being I have more disdain for than Elon Musk at this moment in time.
Legit.
That's
It's
fair.
either him or DeSantis. So you can get me there. You can find me on Mastodon. On Twitter, I'm at Alex LaVelle 2005. On Mastodon, I'm at Alex LaVelle at mastodon.social. You can also just go to alexlavelle.bio site. Should that information change, that will help you find me. Right now, that has a link to Mastodon. I'm there. I'm in the CPoV Discord.
Yes.
We'll say that's probably the easiest way to find me.
Yes.
Mastodon may be intimidating in the same way as soldering, because the figuring out how to start is the hardest part.
Yeah.
Otherwise, in terms of the work I am doing, you can listen to Once Upon a Monster of the Week, which is an actual play Monster of the Week podcast, which I edit. And this won't be out for like a year because that's far ahead we work. But I did actually just GM the first session of a mystery that'll be
Nice.
part of our, I think we're calling it a special between season 1 and season 2. But sort of the big 10th mystery that we have planned. I am co-GMing with Meg Griffin, who normally runs the show.
Nice.
Typically, I'm just behind the board editing, and I'm happy with that. If you are in the Atlanta area, I do theater around here. I have coming up 12 Angry Jurors at Oglethorpe. Have fun.
There you go. Check it out.
Someday, someone will come see a show because I'm on a podcast, and I will be more confused than I have ever been at any point in my life.
And that's really the goal. Let's confuse people.
Yeah.
like-
Kind.
We love confusion.
Confuse with
like-
kindness.
I'm the stage manager. You're not going to see me on stage ever, but
We'll know you're there. Very cool.
Awesome. Very cool.
Well, listeners, we now put it to you. What consoles, handhelds do you wish you could mod? Are you an avid modder? What are your favorite mods that you've done, seen, heard about? What are the aspirations that are out there? Has this episode inspired you to pick up the soldering iron and screwdriver and give it a try for yourself? Because I know I'm excited about it, and we want you to let us know. And there's so many ways you can let us know and get in contact with us. We are still on Twitter. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at funandgamespod. You can email us at funandgamespod@gmail.com. You can go to certainpov.com and find not only a permanent invite link to that aforementioned Discord server where all three of us are there and having conversations about this, but you can also find a lot of other fantastic Certain POV podcasts. You can also go to Patreon, Fun and Games Pod at Patreon, and we wanted to shout out those that have supported us that are up on the high scoreboard, including Alex LaVelle. Thank you, sir, for being on there, as well as Case Aiken, Film It Yourself, Rob Bacon Golem Tremarco, Robert Pruin, and Sean Bowen. Please enter your initials on the high scoreboard. We took the cover off, so you're going to have to kind of get in there and tweak the knobs a little bit. But don't worry, you can get at the letters. Just put them up there, all right? Don't worry, it'll be fine. We're not going to unplug the machine.
We appreciate our patrons so much. Also, if you want to help support the show and you can't give to our Patreon, which is totally understandable, you can write us a review on Apple Podcasts. It's free and it helps us to get featured. The more reviews that we get, the more easily we are featured and the more easily we can grow this community. Another great way that costs nothing that you can support the podcast is tell a friend. Literally, if you have any friends who like video games, they will probably enjoy the show. If you tell one friend and they tell one friend, well, you get how that goes. Always a big help to us, and we really, really greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, and one more time, Alex, thank you so much for joining us for this episode and this conversation and this topic.
anytime.
Awesome. And, you know, whatever means you get in touch with us, however you talk about it and talk with others, thank you so much for joining us in this conversation because, yeah, it's a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Jeff Moonen.
And I'm Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
Have you ever seen something in a theater that you just couldn't explain?
Or have you ever thought about if dying really ain't that bad?
And do you spend sleepless nights wondering exactly what happened to Natalie Wood that night on the boat?
If you answered yes to any of these questions, then it's time for you to exit stage death.
Exit Stage Death is the chilling true stories behind your favorite Broadway shows, releasing bi-weekly on Tuesdays starting May 24th.
So if you want to find out which Broadway house is the most haunted,
Talk about what killed our favorite Broadway flops.
and learn about the murderous path of Mama Rose that took Gypsy Rose Lee to stardom,
It's time for Places, actors. Thank you, Places.
it's time to exit stage death.
CPoV. CertainPOV.com.